Greetings, Hecatrix Bloodbrides, and welcome to Codex Compliant.
Let's have a bit of a venture into Warhammer 40,000 5th edition and see what the Dark Eldar were up to in 2010.
The last time we looked at the Dark Eldar, or Drukhari as GW keeps insisting we call them, was back in 2018. There we looked at their 3rd edition Codex, a rulebook that would hang around for an unreasonably long amount of time with only a minor tweaking in 2003. Meaning that, since the book originally came out in 1998, it was around for 12 years in one form or another, so it was looking pretty haggard and behind the times by 5th edition, with only the most stalwart of Eldar players sticking with them. In 2010 they finally got an update, and with it a new model range and aesthetic. 5th edition's Codex Dark Eldar, a Book of Immortal Evils, was written by Phil Kelly, although he gives credit to Jez Goodwin, who was the evil mastermind behind this incarnation of the Dark Eldar, and the cover art was by Paul Dayton. Always enjoyed how the purple of the Archon's cloak pops against the blues and greens of the rest of the piece. You get a shiny gold star, Paul. Also, this particular copy originally belonged to our friend Drummermat, who was thinking of making a Dark Eldar army back in 5th but didn't end up doing so, and left the book with us at some point. We've never given it back, but he's also never asked for it, so technically speaking, a theft has not occurred.
The first big improvement over the previous Dark Eldar Codex is the sheer amount of backstory contained therein. We've talked many times about how the early 3rd edition codices were fairly light on fluff, but the Dark Eldar were probably the most affected by that since they were a new faction, so there wasn't some older codex to look to. Hell, they only vaguely alluded to their connection to Slaanesh in that one, and that's like the reason for their whole thing. However, by 5th edition, the Codex format had advanced into being much more fluff-heavy, and as such they did not skimp on the Dark Eldar. It goes into detail about the fall of the ancient Eldar civilization, whose decadence rose to such heights that it eventually gave birth to the god of excess, she who thirsts, Slaanesh. The Eldar that survived did so by being on one of the enormous craft worlds that left previously, dismayed at what their civilization had become, or were already part of a hippie commune with dinosaurs, or were squirreled away in the webway, indulging in their dark desires away from real space. The latter group would eventually become the Dark Eldar, who discovered that the constant erosion of their souls by Slaanesh could be abated by replenishing them with the suffering of others, and so their society turned its fondness for excess to the business of slaughter and torture, dragging out the deaths of their victims to better gain sustenance from their mortal souls, preferably while also looking like Cenobites. Or, to put it another way, they're a bunch of wrong'uns.
It cannot be overemphasized how much more fluff is in here than the last codex. For example, there are 5 solid pages just talking about the realm the Dark Eldar call home, the Dark City Comorragh. And as much as we did enjoy the ambiguity to their motivations in the 3rd edition codex, the level of detail here really elevates the threat they present, a threat only really kept in check by the fact they don't desire protracted conflict, they're mostly here just to feed their hunger. In one part they are referred to as the apex predator of the galaxy, and that just feels like a very apt description for them. Sadly, once we get to this era of Codex, we're not really able to summarise all of the fluff in here without that just being the entire video. There's just way too much of it, and it's mostly in line with the modern stuff anyway, so forgive us if we skim by it a little more than usual. Although, just to wet your whistle, did you know that Kabalite warriors' armour is held in place by hooks and barbs going into their skin? Straps and buckles not being edgy enough apparently. And it would not do to not at least mention the time that Vect basically tricks a rival Archon into opening a present that actually contained a black hole, real Looney Tunes stuff there, or when the Dark Eldar helped Craftworld Iyanden against the Orcs because they thought their angsty necromancy was kinda funny, or the War of Dark Revelations, where the Dark Eldar aided the Tau against Hive Fleet Kraken. It was a trick, of course, and it went very badly for the Tau, but it is a little adorable how the Tau were like, yeah, they do look super evil, and the abominations of flesh they send into battle are really messed up, but like, they talk good, and we're already allied with the Kroot, and they eat people, so who are we to judge? We also appreciate how much they use the term oubliette in this book, rather than just saying I don't know, dungeon. Mostly because oubliette is just a much more fun word to say.
The army list in this codex saw expansions from its 3rd edition form, although it's still relatively small. But then I suppose the Dark Eldar never really had the biggest lineup anyway. Before we chat about it though, we want to talk about a pet peeve of ours about the codices of this era. So you know how in more recent editions they put all of the fluff for characters and units in one place and the rules for them are all in another? Keeps the two halves of the book separate as, you don't need the backstory while looking up how a rule works. Well, at this point, they had started to do that, but also some of the rules were in the fluff too, similar to what they'd previously done in the 2nd edition codices. And with the weapon and war gear rules being elsewhere again, it meant that using a new unit could mean a particularly large amount of backing and forthing through the book until you memorised what they did. I know complaining about this now is basically pointless, but we played a lot of 5th and it was a constant, if minor, annoyance.
That aside, the army list in 5th edition was more or less what it is now in 2024, just with a few things shuffled around and a few variants who have fallen away over the years, sometimes landing in Legends. Those variants being Homunculus Ancients, that just have better stats than the presumably slightly less ancient regular Homunculus, Cabalite Trueborn, who are extra good warriors by the merit of not being born in a tube, and then there's the frankly amazingly named Hecatrix Bloodbrides, who are essentially a squad of veteran witches, as well as the name for my new metalcore band. Honestly, the more interesting things here are what changed since their 3rd edition Codex debut than what is different to their current lineup. Like how Incubi lost their Tormentor helms, so no more helmets with silly guns perched on top. Lords became Archons, their bodyguards could now contain non-Eldar, Grotesques got a lot tougher, you were no longer restricted to just one squad of Hellions, and those squads could be twice as big. They got a couple of new flyers in the Razorwing and Void Raven, even though flyers didn't have specific rules yet, so they were just skimmers on taller flight stands. And if you didn't have enough Razor Wings, then Beastmasters could now take flocks of birds, also called Razor Wings, yet further proof that GW must always use every name multiple times. Interestingly, they did have access to Harlequins as an elite's choice, showing off just another example of how GW appears to really want Harlequins around, but can never seem to settle on how or where.
This is also the first time the Power from Pain rule showed up in a codex. The thing that represents how the Dark Eldar are fed by the pain and misery they inflict. And it also helps them deal with the fact that they are a Toughness 3 faction in a universe full of bolters. In this iteration of the rule, any unit with it gained a pain token every time they destroyed a non-vehicle unit. And for each token they gained a new trait. 1 token gave them Feel No Pain, 2 gave them Furious Charge, and 3 made them Fearless. The Feel No Pain would be especially useful, since that gave them what was more or less an additional 4+ save on top of their regular save. That meant that not only was aggressive play being encouraged, early kills, perhaps on a weak target, gave a unit a big advantage, but when combined with most units possessing the fleet's special rule, the army would only get more dangerous as units gained more and more tokens, all of which makes a 5th Ed Dark Eldar player incentivized to default to an incredibly fluffy playstyle. Some units also had access to combat drugs that, due to it not being fixed what kind would be available before a raid, you would roll to decide the effect of before deployment. And you can tell this isn't an earlier edition of 40k because none of the results make the units keel over dead or explode. Also, splinter weapons, being poisoned, did not have a strength value since they always wounded on a 4+, making them very good at taking down high toughness monstrous creatures for a basic weapon. Although that did mean they couldn't harm vehicles because I guess you can't exactly poison a rhino. Well, I mean, you can do that in real life, but please don't.
And talking about weapons, we should probably take a look at the War Gear section, which describes a lot of horrifying things as well as telling you to check other bits of the book, idiot. Most of these were along the lines of, hey, here's a weapon that would already hurt, but through millennia of arcane alien technological development, it hurts a lot more now. Some fun things in here are the Archangel of Pain, a captured demon that could be unleashed once a game to lower nearby enemy weapon skills, the Dark Gate, a tetrahedron that could be hurled to open up a forbidden part of the webway, assailing all under an ordnance blast plate with strength 10 grasping tentacled horrors, chain snares that hang from vehicles and snag units they fly over in the movement phase, and the Vexator mask, which would project the face of the viewer's most trusted friend, beloved ruler, or loved one, and make them hesitate to strike.
As for the named playable characters, this book had quite a few more than they do in 10th edition. On top of Drazar, Urian Rakarth, and Lelith Hesperax, who, Jesus Christ, was up to 9 in weapon skill, ballistic skill, and initiative by this book, there was also Baron Sithonix, the Hellion Lord, an underworld kingpin who was once a noble until some business with a Farseer. He allowed you to take Hellions as a troop choice. Kara Durak, the Decapitator, a multi-armed mandrake with no eyes who is into skulls in a way that feels obsessive even by 40k standards. He's had a bit of a redesign since we last saw him. Duke Sliskus, an eccentric yet impeccably dressed space pirate who could provide any army he's included in with a supply of high-quality drugs, as well as letting all raiders, venoms and ravagers deep strike. Lady Malice, former consort to Vect and the Archon of the Poisoned Tongue, possessing a crystal heart via means too bizarre to get into here, precognition notable enough to manifest in an advantage during deployment, and a sentient sword that occasionally will refuse to do its bonus attacks. And good old Asdrubial Vect, the Supreme Overlord of Comora, a character we've always been surprised isn't currently playable since he really feels like he should be. He was able to seize the initiative at the start of a game on a 4+ due to his massive swollen brain, had the preferred enemy rule against everyone, and re-rolled wounds on Eldar whatever their flavour. He also had some lovely powerful balls. Many of these characters never had a model, so it was up to you to figure out how to make something to represent them. And even Vect, who previously did have a model, still would have required some kind of creativity to field, since in his previous iteration he and his entourage were part of his special Ravager, or possibly Raider, but here were a regular unit who could choose to be mounted on it or not.
The colour section of the book showed off the then new revamp of the Dark Eldar model range, a big improvement on the old model line in our opinion, although it does show that by 5th edition, these sections were not as fun as they used to be. The colour sections of codexes were, especially in 3rd edition, often full of conversions, painting guides, and other fun ideas for your miniatures. We feel that, although 3rd may not be peak 40k necessarily, it was the peak for this very specific niche of the colour sections in codices. By 5th edition, they'd mostly just become a catalogue of models. Sure, they'd show you different schemes to paint them in, and the studio painters were, as ever, incredibly talented, so seeing what was possible was great, but I don't know, these sections just feel a little sterile comparatively. Maybe it's just us, but heavy metal perfection is less inspiring when that's all there is. Without showing you the painting and conversion possibilities at varying skill levels, some of which won't take you years of your life to learn the craft, I feel like the Codex has started to lose something. Although, saying that, they did take a page to talk about how easy it is to kitbash the new Dark Eldar range, as well as the usefulness of keeping spare bits to hang off them as trophies, and just general ways to make your army feel like yours. So that's something.
With that, we finish our look at the 5th edition Dark Eldar Codex. Somehow, we never actually played against anyone using it at the time, despite how much we played 5th edition, but we have some very distinct memories of people talking about them being a little bit of a glass cannon. A set of rules and stats that were powerful and hit hard, but required a bit of finesse to actually pull off a victory, and not just get utterly destroyed. Which not only lines up with the advice given to new Dark Eldar players in the back of this book, but also feels very fitting for the Dark Eldar. And since it had started to feel like they'd kind of been forgotten since 3rd edition by the powers that be, it was nice to see the faction get an update after so many years, revitalising their rules, fluff, and models all at once. And who knows, maybe when their 10th edition codex shows up, Vect will get a new model and become playable again.
Look, if Zodgrod can come back, then all bets are off. Hey there, whilst I've got you, I just wanted to let you know that the stickers that I put up through Crippled Giraffe Decals on Etsy have been put into a bundle. So if you'd like to pick up such classics as Fight Weapon Future Year, or Of Course I Come Fast, I've Got Minis to Paint, then you now can at a little bit of a discount. It's also free shipping, both domestic and international, so there's no excuse not to put something horrifyingly embarrassing on your water bottle. Link is in the description. Sorry this video took a little while to come out, by the way. Snipe got super sick and literally couldn't record their voiceover for like weeks. And as you can imagine, that was not particularly conducive to making a video. Anyway, you know the drill. If you enjoyed this video, then please let us know by liking it, leaving a comment, subscribing, or maybe thanking us in the purest possible way. With money at patreon.com/snipeandwib. Oh, we're also on TikTok now, at snipeandwib. It's the same stuff we've been putting out here as shorts, but, you know, it's just over there in case that's your preferred micro video platform. We're not going to judge. Much.